I'm Kira Cleveland, and this is Human Intelligence. With my co host, Ned Hayes, we talk about the importance of human creativity in the age of AI. Welcome to the future. Human Intelligence Show is happy to welcome Jim Amos to the pod today. Jim bills himself as a human-first technologist. He's an extremely knowledgeable leader of software engineering teams with over 20 years of experience as a leading software developer, manager, and coach. Over the past year, Jim has really made a name for himself as a generative AI expert, but not in the way that you'd expect. He's an expert in all things machine learning and artificial intelligence, but he's been noted as one of the leading technical skeptics. His ideas and insights are coupled in the same breath with such leading thinkers as Jeffrey Hinton, Timnit Gebru, and Gary Marcus. Currently, he works on two Substack newsletters, Humanware, which covers human-centered software engineering and management, as well as Deeply Wrong, which explores how irresponsible technology use, including AI, harms the world. We're excited to learn more about his activities and his perspective, so welcome to the show, Jim.
Thank you, Kira. That was a great introduction. I am feel very privileged to be mentioned alongside some of those names of people I very much admire and respect. So I really appreciate that. And thank you for inviting me today.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure having you. And again, it looks like the work you've done out in the world is a great contribution. So first, I like to dive into, generative AI. What is it to you?
Yeah, and that's a great question because it does seem to be something different to everybody. And that's really part of the problem, I think, is that generative AI, once it came out of academia into the kind of commercial realm that it's in now, once it was productized, there was no instructions. It didn't come with any instructions. It didn't come with a set of kind of guidance in terms of what it should be to us or what it should be to you versus the next person. So there's a lot of confusion and there's a lot of let's try to make this product work for everybody and fit every type of situation and work in every type of scenario, right? And I really think that's one of the key reasons why so far it seems to have failed. Because as anybody who's worked in the product industry knows, and I'm sure you know this a lot better than me, Kara, with your experience in product, you actually have to design a product that fits a particular need, that solves a particular problem, and is able to be commercialized. So I think generative AI has kind of failed on all those counts, right? We have big tech leaders like Sam Altman and Dario Amodei, and we have Microsoft and we have Meta and the other big players, all trying to lead the charge in generative AI, but not one of them has really explained what is the product, what is the purpose, who is the target audience. They all seem to have a different idea, right? So Anthropic seem to be billing their product mostly as an AI coding tool for developers who want to be lazy. And Microsoft are selling it as a co-pilot and kind of a search add-on for people who want to pay them more money. And Meta is, if you listen to what Zuckerberg has been saying most recently, is really trying to double down on the idea that no, generative AI is about chatbots and it's about providing virtual friends and virtual romantic partners and virtual assistants to people, right? So that's where they've gone with it. And it's weird, right? Because this is the same product. It's a large language model. And all these
Yeah.
companies say it's something completely different. What are we supposed to think? What are we supposed to, how are we supposed to make that a part of our lives when it's like 15 million different things? It doesn't
Absolutely.
make any sense.
No, it doesn't. And that's a great point. You said, as somebody from product, I feel you on that. Like who is
Yeah,
what is the thing supposed to be? What is the problem?
right.
Yeah.
Yep. And it goes against everything we've always known in computing and technology, right? Because computers since inception have always been designed to do, one or a few things and do it right, do it accurately, right? It's deterministic. Computers have always been deterministic, which means, two plus two always equals four, right? We ask a computer to do something, it does that thing. And then we move on to the next task, it does that thing. large language models, because they're non-deterministic, we've attempted to make a computer system that is kind of creative. So 2 plus 2 doesn't always equal 4. Sometimes it's going to equal 5. But how helpful is that? How
Yeah,
useful
right.
is that? What
Right.
is the practical advantage of a computer that makes things up? You know?
Let's turn it even further because besides just not serving an immediate or apparent need, it's also making the world worse.
Mhm.
So you and I have talked about this some in the past, Jim, but how is generative AI making the world worse for us?
In many ways. And another thing I want to say before we get into why generative AI is making the world worse is that AI in general, the whole umbrella of AI, is has both a positive and a negative role that it's playing in society, right? So, and generative AI is just the newest branch of that, right? AI is all around us, has been for a long time now. They're good and bad. So we have predictive AI that
Mhm.
people use for using to predict marketing trends, stock market returns. It's used in supply chain management, chemical like protein folding, like the AlphaFold protein folding experiments. But it's also been used for security cameras that are racially discriminate against people. It's been used to develop algorithms that discriminate people in job applications or rental applications based on the color of their skin or the what surname they have or their place of birth or whatever. So and then we also have like military uses of AI. There are drones that use AI to decide who lives and dies. That's at the very extreme of how AI is affecting the world. And so the reason I want to say that, the reason I want to underscore that is in all of my criticisms online and my pushback on the generative AI
Mhm.
narrative, I do sometimes get well-meaning AI experts who who come to me and say, "Jim, I agree with you that generative AI is bad, but regular AI, good old-fashioned AI, like
Yeah.
neural networks and deep learning and machine learning, that's a-okay. That's good. That's all good. That's all, doing great things in
God's
society."
work in the world, right.
Right. And so I just always want to push back on that gently and say, well, you're half right. There is potential for good to come out of that. I don't think protein folding is evil, right? But let's just be honest and say that those algorithms do sometimes become, what was coined by one famous author, weapons of mass destruction, right? So they are doing harm in the world. And so when we come to generative AI, it's almost like the same story, right? There is potential for, I wouldn't say potential for good because I haven't really seen it, but there's at least potential for, applications that may make sense in some scenarios to some types of people. Like, I'm not going to criticize someone for using generative AI if they are a non-native English speaker and they're trying to sound professional on a platform like LinkedIn
Mhm.
and they don't want people to discriminate against them. So ChatGPT or another tool like that helps them sound professional, helps them fit in, and helps them feel better about being in that crowd of other English speakers who are like kind of dominating that platform.
Mhm.
So and I can really think of very few use cases where that's true, right? Where I can say, you know what, I'm not going to criticize that use of generative AI. But mostly what it's been is there are kind of two tracks that I find myself thinking about most often. One is that it's making humans more lazy. It's offering shortcuts,
Mhm.
cognitive shortcuts. People are outsourcing their brains
Mhm.
to an algorithm that's really like not worthy of outsourcing our cognitive functions to, right? It's not really intelligent. It's not really rational. It doesn't really have the ability to reason, despite the fanfare, despite some of the research papers that claim that it can. It doesn't really live up to expectations in that regard. If you are outsourcing your brain to a chat GPT or another generative algorithm, you're really selling yourself short because it really is not a magical machine. It's not a magic 8 ball that can really figure out anything that hasn't been figured out before, right? It's a mashup of human knowledge, and also it's only based on language constructs, not real understanding. And a lot of people get kind of mixed up with this. They get confused. They talk to a chatbot and they think, well, it's so coherent. It sounds just like a real person. There must be something behind the curtain that understands me, right? But the
Yeah.
truth is, it doesn't. It doesn't understand you at all.
Well,
It
and
only understands the arrangement of words that you're saying.
absolutely. So I
Mhm.
love the direction you're going. And just along those lines, one thing that we've been finding is that there's kind of a distinguishing between the technology itself and the way it's being pushed at us, right? Like
Mhm.
there's generative AI, there's this algorithmic, parrot, but then there's also the businesses that are pushing
Yeah.
narrative to us,
Yeah.
and the businesses generating a certain unethical practice. Do you have thoughts around that or
Oh yeah, absolutely. Honestly, this subject, unlike any other subject I've ever studied before, has a tendency to cause my mind to want to like go off in a million different tangents. I'm sure it's the same for you
we
and
understand?
Ned
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Yeah, you can't just stick to one thing because it hits everything, right? But yeah, the kind of the corporate agenda, the corporate narrative is very much one of. But there's two things. There's the here and now that they're selling, which is they're saying the loud part out loud, the quiet part out loud now. They're saying this technology can replace humans. This can replace entire departments at your workforce. Especially now we're talking about agentic AI. We're basically designing human replacements. So they're basically selling that to corporations right now. But then there's another weirder kind of narrative that is being sold, which you've heard Sam Altman talking about like only yesterday, where he's talking about like Dyson spheres in space and
It's really crazy talk. Yeah.
self-replicating machines based on all the science fiction he's read. And you know what? I've read that science fiction too. I love science fiction, but I know the difference between science fiction and reality. Like we live in the real world. The science fiction he's talking about is like thousands of years in the future.
Mhm.
And so, and that's another like part of the narrative that they're selling. The AGI or the super intelligence narrative. You've heard even like data scientists like Ilya Sutskever talks about super intelligence, and Geoffrey Hinton, who I respect on one level as a Nobel laureate, is basically going way out on a limb to say, Terminator is on our doorstep. Like we're going to be annihilated any minute. And I don't think that's true. None of that is true. I think that, and I wonder if that kind of super intelligence, all threatening, like dystopian narrative is perceived by people like Sam Altman as somehow helpful to him. I don't really know
Yeah. Well,
why, but why is he doing it? I'm not really entirely sure.
right. Well, a recent guest on this show mentioned that they felt like tech bros are gaslit, but they weren't quite sure if they were gaslighting us or they were gaslit themselves. That they
Right.
like, are they
Hmm.
actually fooling themselves? Do they believe their own hype? Why
Right.
do they actually believe in AGI, or are they just hoping for a future that involves them getting rich?
Sure. Yeah. I think that's a great question. And it's going to be a question that I look forward to, historians trying to unravel. We've got some great books out there already trying to kind of get to that. But yeah, it's very very strange. There is definitely I do think on the one hand the kind of at least the AGI part of it, saying that we will have generalized intelligence. I think the idea there is to really kind of hammer home the idea to current CEOs to that you will be able to replace your entire workforce at some point, right?
Right.
Everybody
People are saying
knows.
this every day. Yeah.
Yeah, because everybody knows your employees are your biggest expense, right? Typically, it's your biggest expense. So just in terms of pure like profit play, profit at the cost at all costs, you want to downscale until you're, a company of one. Which I don't know, even that is a weird concept because how many business leaders out there got into business just to make money. Like, I know money makes the world go around and it motivates all of us and it is the biggest motivator. But don't we also want to kind of work with people and like build things and like explore and discover and invent? Isn't that like and create? Aren't those all like innate human tendencies and
Mhm.
desires that will never go away? Like, so why would you want a society of like just completely automated companies, and humans sitting, in like a Wall-E kind of society where humans don't do anything anymore. We just sit there and watch Netflix and, plug into the metaverse. Like, it doesn't make any sense. When you really think about it, it doesn't make any sense. Nobody wants that. I don't think anybody really wants that kind of future.
I know I don't. I definitely like humans in my world and work
Right.
with people. Like, I do better with people.
Mhm,
It's part of my nature at least. When I think about working with people and learning in that
mhm,
process, right? And the way
mhm,
that generative AI is kind of changing the playing field within the engineering space, what do engineers
mhm.
lose by doing vibe coding work? Like what's
Yeah.
the takeaway of the engineering process?
Yeah, good segue. Yeah, vibe coding is one of the worst things to happen to software engineering in recent years. It's nonsensical, right? I've been in the technology space for over 20 years, and I started out as just a web developer, building websites when websites were still a pretty new thing. And in all that time, what's always been consistently held true in engineering circles is that the idea is that you build things that are robust, reliable, you use methodologies that are testable and repeatable, right? There is an ethos, just like there is in other industries, that are standardized, like regular engineering and civil engineering. So there are these standards that you expect to uphold. And within that framework, there are all kinds of things that, are pertinent to software architects. So, we believe in using design patterns and replicable code. We believe in extendability, reliability, observability of everything we do. We don't just ignore errors, we take them seriously and, collate them and try to respond to them. And we build systems that are predictable. You have a goal in mind, you automate a process, and you make sure that the system does exactly what you designed it to do, right? That's always been the way of computing. So now there's two things that have been that are changing. Number one is just the idea that apparently programming doesn't have to be reliable or systematic or repeatable or predictable anymore. That you can introduce a generative element where you're allowing an AI to make decisions for you, and there isn't necessarily much of a human in the loop, except for someone issuing prompts and maybe checking some of the code some of the time. And then secondly, there's the idea that you don't even need to learn coding best practices anymore. You don't need to go through what I've always thought of as an industry where you very much rely on learning from your superiors. You learn from, if you're a junior developer, you learn from the senior developers around you, right? So
Yeah.
it's more like an apprenticeship industry. And so by introducing this idea of vibe coding, now you've got people entering the industry that have no knowledge of best practices or any of those like standardized kind of tenets of software programming. And they may never learn because senior developers are eventually going to, retire or quit the industry. And you're going to have just an influx of vibe coders who are just wholly relying on AI. And and the weird thing is, we know that AI, like the AI coding tools, they hallucinate up to like 70% of the time, right? And we know they make up things and they get things wrong. And so all of that kind of careful, considerate, standardized thinking goes out the window. What are you left with? You're left with chaos, right? I think we're gonna see chaos. We've already seen some like, we laugh at it, but when a guy says, "Oh no, the AI coding tool deleted my entire database," yeah, we think that's funny, but it's not funny. Like, if you think about
Yeah.
that happening on a
Yeah.
big scale, right? Planes are gonna drop out of the sky at some point if that's happening, right?
Mm.
Right.
So it's preposterous. It's insane. It makes no sense at all. It's completely anathemia to anything I've ever learned in this industry.
Yeah. Well, and so along those lines with, the chaos of AI, on your Substack Humanware, you discuss how engineering teams and creative teams in general really work better together in a more
Mhm.
humane manner, or human manner almost these days. Can you tell us more about your work there?
Yeah, thanks for checking out my Substack.
Yeah, of course.
That's great. Yeah, I've always in all the time that I've been in leadership, and even before that, when I was just like a senior developer, and I always tried to like mentor the people around me. I always just believed that it's not enough to just understand computers and understand how computers can be integrated with software code to create systems, right? It's not just about the systems. It's always about the people working on those systems and also the people you're building those systems for, right? So I've always been a very kind of customer or end user focused developer, as well as someone who's focused on the peer to peer relationship with other developers. And then when I moved into management, I was very focused on, guiding and mentoring the people who reported to me. And they needed touch points. They needed human interaction, sometimes human intervention to guide them along the way, right? And I think that's true of all humans in all endeavors and has been since the beginning of time. I'm sure there was a product manager working on the pyramids, right? They
Absolutely.
Yep.
right? They weren't just like doing it, off the cuff, right? So they had someone organizing things. And so I think that's always been true. And there's no reason why that isn't still true today. We're being fed this kind of lie or this disinformation that apparently we don't need human organization, we don't need human leadership anymore. All these leaders are espousing this AI first mantra, which I consider, humans last. If you're AI first, you're kind of humans last, but it's not true. So I have always held this to be true throughout my career. And I think if you ever talk to anyone that's ever reported to me or worked with me, you'd find that that's a true story, right? I've really tried to live my words. And people are not replicable as AI systems. And this is another thing that I think doesn't get talked about enough. And I wish more leaders understood this, that in software engineering, you can often automate very procedural tasks, right? If you've got someone who's spending too much of their time kind of scanning through emails and trying to summarize them for the executive leadership team, for example, of course, you look for some shortcuts, right? So that might be a good use case for generative AI. Of course, you can already do that with natural language processing before LLMs even existed, but you might want to automate that type of task so that that employee can spend their time doing, more high level work. But the fallacy comes in where we think that somehow multi-level agentic AI can replace entire roles or entire teams. And that is really kind of very disrespectful and dehumanizing and very overly reductive, because when you really think about the work that knowledge workers do, whether you're a software developer, product manager, project manager, whether you're a UXD professional or anything else, or even even an engineering manager, your day to day is full of complexity and nuance that cannot be systematized. Right? It's Every day is different. Every conversation is different. The way you have to, if you're a leader, you're not just there to oversee and direct, you're there to really guide and to motivate. Computer systems, generative AI systems can't motivate, they can't inspire, except in cases where we've seen it gone wrong. Like, we've seen generative AI systems motivate people to unalive themselves, which is,
Yeah, we
that was
have.
in the New York Times yesterday. But it's not motivating people to do great jobs, to do great work, right? So it's wholly demeaning
Yeah.
to think that we can do that. Human beings are so complex and their work is so complex that we can never systematize it. In fact, back in the 1980s, the first what we call there was an AI winter after the 1980s because during the 1980s, a lot of companies like IBM tried to create what they called expert systems, and these were algorithmic attempts to distill human knowledge. So they would take a worker like someone who works in management, and they would interview them, and they would say, "What are all the things you do in a day? What are all the decision points you make?" And they would try to systematize it. They would try to turn that into a repeatable computational system. And it completely failed. It completely failed.
Yeah.
And thus began the first AI winter. So it's like we're trying to do that again with AI agents. It's the same thing.
Right, it's gonna fall off the cliff again. So you've actually made similar points in your Maven course. And I
Mhm.
actually took one of your courses, and you have multiple courses up there that are really helpful to people. Could you tell us more about kind of what you offer in your courses and how do they help people to be more intelligent and informed about AI?
Sure. Thanks for the plug. So yeah, you can find out about these Maven courses on my LinkedIn. You can
Mhm.
find various links to them, and you can join the waitlist for one of them right now. But my focus right now has been on trying to cut through the hype and the disinformation to get to the reality of AI, and and that includes like what AI really is, what it isn't. It includes, the narrative, some of the narrative aspects we've talked about today that are misleading. It includes things like why you want to talk to your employees a certain way about AI and why you should be cautious about rolling AI out without a plan or without guidance or without a real kind of value proposition for your employees, why you shouldn't talk in ways that are just dehumanizing and demoralizing. So it's very much aimed at most of it is mainly aimed at leadership right now. I'm really trying to talk to leadership because I see them as playing this pivotal role right now that could change the course of history in the short term. Like, are you someone who is in leadership and are you fully AI literate and are you willing to go the extra mile to understand the pros and the cons of fully embracing AI rather than just kind of repeating the memo that's going around as being shared by all the CEOs right now. It seems to kind of have the same narrative, right? You've seen in recent months many high profile CEOs come out and say, I am also AI first. I am also AI first. And there's always a backlash. The general public and the employees always turn against those leaders. And I think more leaders need to recognize that and need to understand why that's happening and learn how to avoid that, how to mitigate that. And that's something I'm trying to offer when I speak to them. I'm trying to
Right.
be the voice of reason.
Well, and given your experience and your background, you have so much insight to offer that I think it's really valuable for people to go through it. It's a good counterpoint to these people who are pushing AI without the knowledge and the technical insight that you provide. And so you're providing really some good balance, not negative technology, but
Mhm.
instead a positive approach to it. So
Thank
I,
you.
I did wonder as we continue to move forward, one thing that's often overlooked here is human creativity. So, how do you think we should be foregrounding human creativity? And of course, many of these technologies are going to be around for a while. How do we keep lifting up human creativity in this age of constant pushing of tech?
Sure. Well, I think we have to embrace creativity and remember that it is an innate part of who we are as a species, right? It's not just a side effect. It's not just something we sometimes do to earn a living. It's a core need that we have, right? To create. Even people like me who've worked in technology all their lives, and I have no like creative talent. Like I can't draw to save my life. I can't play an instrument, even though I've tried. I'm jealous of my entire family. They can all play instruments and I can't. But even, in the tech realm, I recognize that I've been a creative problem solver, right? So I've always been creative in that way. And I also write, so I'm creative in that way too. And so I think everyone, if they really think about it, there's a part of them that is creative. They're not just using one hemisphere of their mind. Most people are using both hemispheres of their mind, even if they don't realize it. And so creativity is inherent. It's important to, it's a part of our evolution that, we should want to cherish and continue. I think that creative people who are like directly creative, like artists, writers, musicians right now who are being exploited by this technology, who are being threatened by this technology, I really think they should be as critical as possible and they should band together to push back in as many ways as possible on the narrative that they should just be replaced, right? We should reject the idea that AI art is art. It's not. You're prompting art from a vending machine, right? That's all it is. You're not an artist if you just prompted for it. You're not a musician if you just prompted for it. Like we should push back on that. We should never allow non-artists to just hijack the word artist, right? Or creator. We shouldn't do that because it's just deeply disrespectful and it's just untrue at every level. I think that anything artists can do to support regulations, like Ed Newton Rex in the UK has been fighting for protecting copyright and protecting artist rights, and I think every artist needs to just get behind that. And if there's any similar things happening in the US, like we need to all get behind that. So it's like getting behind any kind of regulatory thing that's happening, any kind of legal movement that's happening, and also just rejecting this narrative of the art sales of the world who say that they're artists when they're not, because that's just muddying the waters. And don't get into debates with these people either, because it can be very circular and it goes nowhere.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And you definitely echo many that are in the creator world right now, and that's part of what we're committed to at the Human Intelligence Institute too, is
Absolutely.
is to preserve and highlight the value of human creativity. So we really appreciate that. We also really appreciate your work in demystifying what AI is, really getting real with it, highlighting and celebrating the journey of human learning and collaboration in the workplace, especially in the technology space. And we really appreciate having you on the show.
Thank you, Kira and Ned, for having me. I hope I said some things that resonate today.
Absolutely. Great discussion. Thank you, Jim. Take care.
You can find out more about any of these news items and hear the complete interview on the extended premium version of our podcast at humanintelligence.news. Today's episode was produced by Ned Hayes and engineered by Muhammad Adnan. Our analog-only human-themed music was created for the Human Intelligence podcast by Josh Pinkston of Nature and Spirit. This episode, and every episode, is brought to you by the Human Intelligence Institute team. That's all for Human Intelligence. Thanks for listening to today's episode. As always, this episode is available online at humanintelligence.news.